Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode. Whenever a country tries to define its progress, it always talks about its growth in terms of its GDP, that is, gross domestic product. But have you ever thought, is it actually a correct measure to define a country's growth? Whenever there is an increase in a country's GDP, why there is no or very little change in people's well being? Think about our own country, India. What does it really mean for people when a country's GDP increases? If you want to know the answers, do check out this video. I believe most of you know what GDP is, but if you don't, then don't worry. Let's see what it is. GDP stands for Gross Domestic Product, which is the monetary value of all final products and services in a country over a period of time. It simply means the sum of the values of all the products from the smallest product like needle to the largest products like buildings and malls. Some people think that higher GDP means a better standard of living and more happiness. But let me ask you this. When India says it has become the world's fifth largest economy as its GDP ranks fifth in the world, have you ever thought what does that mean for you? And probably some of you might think your life is pretty much the same as it was when India was seventh largest economy a few years back. And let me tell you, you are actually right. As you know by now that GDP just considers the tangible growth of a country, whereas a country is much more than its products and services. Many experts believe that GDP is not the correct measure to define a country's growth, and they do have genuine reasons. These reasons, or we can say limitations of GDP, can be categorized into two sections, one economic and other social. In my opinion, economic limitations are not as important as social limitations. In fact, if social limitations are not to be addressed in the country's growth, then there is no point in addressing the economic limitations at all. You will understand why it is like that as we move forward. So, first, let's talk about economic limitations. As per experts and as data suggests, GDP only addresses average income of a country. It does not consider income from unorganized sectors such as the income of street vendors, underground or black market, daily wage workers, and household workers. GDP includes only market transactions, because of which the work done for one's own use, such as growing food for own consumption and doing voluntary work, is not considered as GDP. As a result of this, if a country is categorized as a poor country based on its GDP, then actually that country could be less poor as GDP does not consider income from the unorganized sectors. Another most important thing GDP does not consider is income inequality or income distribution. Let's look at an example. In India, the growth of Reliance results in India's GDP increase, which does not necessarily mean the growth of Indian people. It simply means Mukesh Ambani is richer than before, which does not benefit anyone else in India except the Indian government in terms of taxes, and obviously Mukesh Ambani himself. Now, let's look at the second part, GDP social limitations. In order to know how much a country has progressed, it is very important for a country to know and understand how socially it is progressing, and you just saw GDP does not give us any idea about it. This is because GDP does not consider many social aspects of a country. For example, GDP does not consider the health of a country's citizens and how happy people are in a country. What good is the progress of a country if its people are not healthy and are not happy? The best example of this is China. Even if China is now a superpower and second largest economy, its people are not really happy as they do not have freedom of speech, they are being monitored 24/7 by Chinese government, and they have many other issues. Similarly, GDP does not consider how much the educational system of a country has improved, how safe and free people feel in a country, and many other things. The best example of this is North Korea. Even if North Korea's GDP increases, it does not bring any good to its citizens as they do not have any freedom. GDP does not consider the increase in population. For example, if a country's population has increased by 4% and its GDP has increased by 2% in a year, then even if the GDP has increased, the average income per person is actually decreased in that year, and this cannot be considered as progress. Another most important thing, the GDP does not consider the impact of a country's growth on the environment. For example, the world's largest economies like the US and China have the highest growth in terms of GDP, but they are also the biggest contributor to global warming or climate change. And the ridiculous thing is, GDP does not differentiate the income based on its purpose. Let's look at an example. In 2010, $90 billion spent in cleanup and damages from the BP oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico. This $90 billion considered in a GDP, which increased the average income of an American person by $300 without any change in that person's well-being. Not only this, but GDP did not even consider the environmental losses because of that oil spill. Similar is the case when the money will be spent on disaster recovery, which will be considered as an income under GDP. So, as you can see, GDP is not a very good indicator of a country's actual growth. Don't you think it would be great to have an indicator which would tell us not just country's economic growth, but its people well-being, the environmental impact of a country's growth, and many other things which cannot be valued in terms of money? Well, unfortunately, there isn't just one which counts everything, but there are several alternatives to GDP. Let's look at them. First, HDI, the Human Development Index. Human Development Index tracks the development of 4 sectors, and it does not only track the development of the rich but also of the poor. HDI measures the traditional economic growth like GDP does, along with the development in education and health sector. Second one is Social Progress Index. Social Progress Index is basically the advanced version of the Human Development Index, as it tracks not only 4 but 54 sectors like access to water and sanitation, education and health outcomes, public criminality, freedom, housing, access to information, and communication. But as you can see, Social Progress Index is very complex and it is hard to implement practically. India's neighbor Bhutan in 1972 declared that it will no longer use GDP and will define its growth in terms of Gross National Happiness Index. This index basically considers governance, socio-economic development, cultural preservation, and environmental conservation. This seems very attractive, but for big countries this is very complex, and right now no other country is using it except Bhutan itself. Finally, as you can see, there is no one indicator which will consider all the important sectors to define a country's real progress. But what I think, on the individual basis, what we can do is to educate people and tell them that just because a country's GDP is high does not necessarily mean that everyone is happy and everything in that country is developing, and there are many other indicators by which you can define a country's progress. So that's it for today, guys. Hope you enjoyed and learned something new from this video. If you like this video, do share it with your friends and subscribe to our channel. Thanks a lot. Bye bye. Take care.